Well, good evening, church. So good to see you guys. See you, youth. Well, we are on a roll, it seems like. Just continuing on as we continue in our Old Testament study of the book of Genesis. And so turn in your Bible, if you will, to Genesis chapter 46 tonight. Last week we covered the great reveal, if you will. After being away for 22 years, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. But you can imagine this whole revealing process that happens in the fact that they're 2 years into this famine, and not just Egypt is affected, but the whole land, the known world is affected by this. And so people are now coming in from other places, and there's this family that comes in, and Joseph recognizes them right away, and he knows they're his brothers. And it takes months before he actually reveals himself to them. Because every time they took a trip, they took the trip first time and then they go back, it's almost a month journey because of, I think it's like 500 miles. And so it would take them a while to get there, get their supplies, head on back. They're a little slower because now they're filled up. And then they have to do it again. And this next time again. So it's been months since the first time he laid eyes on his brothers. And now, as we looked at last week, he can't hold it. And yet, the things that he has allowed to do, he finally gets to that point where he reveals himself to them. And it's funny because we looked at what we looked at last week, where as he's talking to them, all of a sudden he gets so emotional that he can't hold it. And he just begins to cry. And it's not just this little whimper. I mean, he is bawling uncontrollably. And then when he reveals himself, after he chases everybody out, he reveals himself to his brothers, and they are stunned. They are speechless. They're paralyzed, if you will. Because now they recognize him. Even though he looks like an Egyptian, he has the makeup on, he has a bald head. He doesn't look like a Hebrew. He's been talking to them in Egyptian. And now they recognize him. And I thought about this as I was, kind of thinking about this whole thing. His brothers recognize him, but I would say except for Benjamin. Benjamin was 1 year old when his brother was taken into slavery. He doesn't know what his brother looks like. They didn't FaceTime. He had no clue what this guy looks like. He may have heard about him, but when he reveals himself to them, and he says, guys, it's okay. I know that you guys sold me into slavery. I wonder if Benjamin's going, you guys did what? That's why I haven't seen my brothers, because of you? Because I don't think they let him in on this whole thing. So he's just kind of finding out. But his brothers recognize him for sure. And now that he's speaking Hebrew to them, he is speaking perfect Hebrew to them. And I could bet as they started hearing him speak Hebrew, they recognized the voice. That's their brother's voice. Oh, I'm sure he changed from 17 to 30-something, 39 almost. But they recognize the voice. And when he's crying, I could guarantee you now it clicks. They could remember the cries when he was in the pit, when he's getting drove away. And they're hearing him cry, and they're going, I remember that cry. All of that was probably ringing in their ears. And I truly believe that everything that they've gone through there, I believe that the Lord had allowed, or should I say directed Joseph to put his brothers through the ringer because they've been tested. He wasn't trying to be mean to them. He wasn't trying to get back at them. It wasn't a tit for tat at this moment. He was testing their hearts, and I believe that the Lord directed him to test their hearts to see, to show him that there had truly been a change of heart. And that's why he did things to them and said things to them about their little brother, even when they bring their brother and he gives them 5 times more food to see how are they going to react, because they're finally realizing everything that we've done around him and said around him. He knew exactly what we were saying because he speaks Hebrew. And there's been a great change in his brother's lives because he saw how they were treating his brother and how they were talking about their father. But I have to say that God has done an amazing work, a great and mighty work in the life of Joseph as well. Showing him along the way that God had been with him, that God was the one that put him in this situation. For 22 years, he's been away from his family. And there's been a lot of heartache in his life. There's been a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. But it's gotten him to this point. And this is, again, as I was sharing with you guys last week, when we're going through our situations, when we're in our heartache, in the midst of our heartache, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the suffering, it's hard for us to really comprehend, perhaps God has allowed me to be in this situation to get me to this point. Because oftentimes we're crying and going, Lord, get me out of this. And God never promised that he would get us out of it. He just promised that he would see us through it. That he would be with us every step of the way. But it's hard for us, isn't it? It's hard for us when we're in the middle of that trial, of that situation, to praise God and say, Lord, you've put me in this situation. I know sometimes we say that to one another to look good in front of each other. And inside you're dying because you don't want to tell people that you're actually dying inside because it would make you look less Christian. And yeah, just about all of us, man, we go through that moment, through that time where we should be able to be honest with one another at least. But for 22 years, God has been working in the heart of Joseph, not just his brothers. And he brought him to this point, and it wasn't just for him, to mature him, to strengthen him. He brought him to this point for others. And I think that, again, when we're going through those moments, through those times, it's hard for us to go, Lord, how are you going to use this in somebody else's life? And it just wasn't for others as far as his family. It was for the whole world at that time because everything is crashing down around them. And I think oftentimes when everything is falling apart, we're going, Lord, where are you? It's interesting because of what we're going through right now in our country. But it's not just our country, right? It's around the world. There's so much pain, so much suffering. I think it's just kind of touched us a little bit. It's funny because some of us are old enough to remember back in the 70s when we were going through all this stuff with the Jimmy Carter administration, we're going, oh my gosh, the worst president ever. It can't get any worse. And we're going, yeah, it can. Yeah, it can. And yet, again, that's not the first time that people have gone through heartache, suffering, and pain. We read about it continually through Scripture. And so we're going to cover the entire chapter tonight. Let's read the first 7 verses of chapter 46 of Genesis, beginning in verse 1. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Jacob. Not Jacob, Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry them. So they took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all the descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Jacob has taken many steps in his life. I know. Some of you guys would be going, of course, he started walking when he was probably 2 years old. He's taken his first step when he started. He's taken a lot of steps. I understand that. But be that as it may, this man has taken many, many steps in his life. He is about 130 years right now. 130 years old. He has gone in so many different directions. And when I'm talking about taking steps, he's taken some major steps in his journey of life. And many of those steps that he took, because we know his life, because we know his character, many of the steps that he has taken have not been in faith. Many of the steps that he's taken in the flesh. And I don't know about you, but when we step out in the flesh instead of in faith, we end up taking steps that are kind of missteps, half steps. We stumble over our steps when we take off in our own strength. But we take many steps. And yet, even though he's taken a lot of steps, major steps in the flesh, there has been some steps in his life that have been steps of faith. And most of those steps in faith have come to him when he first acknowledged God for direction. The Bible tells us that we are to acknowledge God in all our ways, and he will direct our path. Now, even when we're acknowledging God and he's directing our path, sometimes he tells us to move that way, and sometimes we're going, is it that way or not, God? And sometimes it's kind of confusing, isn't it? Because you know that God's saying, no, I want you to move here, and you're going, but which way? He says, just take a step. And you're going, well, I don't want to take the wrong step. And I think I've shared with you guys, if you don't know how to take the step and he's leading you, just lean in that direction and see what happens. Just lean in that direction to take that step, because sometimes I'm scared. I don't want to take that step when God's going, hey, it's time to do this or to do that. And I'm going, okay, well, I'm going to wait and pray. And he knows that I'm a waiter. He knows I love to wait. And he's the one that kind of just pushes me in that direction sometimes, because I want to make sure that I'm not taking a misstep, especially when it comes to my wife and my family and the church. I don't want to ever take a step of faith and thinking it's faith, and it's not. It's the flesh. But when we acknowledge God in all our ways and we're still for a moment, he leads us in that direction that he wants us to go. Now, it's interesting because there's been times in Jacob's life that he really didn't acknowledge God, but God showed up anyway. Spoke to him about the direction without him even asking. And again, there's times in our lives that we just are going in one direction, but I'll tell you this, for the most part, we should be prayed up and read up in such a way that when we're taking our steps, it's because God's already leading. He's going before us. And sometimes we've seen that in Jacob's life. But now it tells us that he took his journey. Because of the news that he got at the end of our last study, at the end of our last chapter, when his sons come back from Egypt and they've seen Joseph, they came back and told him, hey, your son, Joseph, is still alive. It's interesting because it tells us that his heart stood still. He couldn't believe that. How in the world could that even be true? That my son that I haven't seen for 22 years, that went off up to Shechem, and he never returned, and yet you guys brought me back his coat that was torn up and all bloody. It's interesting because those guys never told him, hey, I think this is what happened. He assumed, oh, he must have gotten killed by a wild beast. And they're going, yes, Dad, bingo, I think you got it. And they let him believe all that for 22 years. He hasn't taken very many journeys. I think he was so bummed out because his son was gone that he was so afraid to take a step, any step, in any direction. And yet when they tell him that he is still alive, his heart stops. He basically has a heart attack because he didn't believe them. But when he came to the understanding that what his sons were telling him were true, because he could see right behind him, and they're going, no, really, man, he is like next to Pharaoh. Pharaoh sent all these carts. Look at this. That's when he started believing, like, whoa, where'd you guys get all that stuff? We're telling you, Dad. Joseph is alive. He's second in command to Pharaoh. He's his right-hand man. To come to a point in his life that some of his hope is gone. Oh, still has his hope. He was scared to death to send Benjamin, but he saw Benjamin. Benjamin came back. But he's scared to death to take another step. And yet we are told that he took his journey. And he took with him all that he had. And it's interesting because that says a lot to us here. In that his first step on this journey was that he believed what they were telling him. That was his first step, that he believed. He believed that his son was still alive. Then that next step is that he agreed to go on this journey because he hadn't moved in a long time. He was familiar with what he had, and that's frightening. When we get comfortable and we get complacent and we get scared to move because there's pain on that other side. But he believes them, and then he agrees to go. And this next step of faith was huge in that he packed everything. He packed all that he had. He packed all that was necessary. Again, they told him, hey, don't bring anything with you. Just whatever is necessary. And he's going to do that. And as he begins this journey to Egypt, he first makes a pit stop in Beersheba. Now, he's up in Hebron. That's where they had landed. And that's about 25 miles north of where Beersheba is. And Beersheba would be like the lowest, most part of Canaan at that time. And you hear the phrase from Dan, which would be the northernmost part, to Beersheba, which would be the southernmost part. They were down here, and they come to Beersheba, but this is not the first time they've been in Beersheba, because they've been around Beersheba. And that trip from Hebron to Beersheba, if you were all alone, if you were a stud, man, you can make it there in one day. But he's all loaded down with these carts. So it's probably going to take him a couple days' journey to move everybody from there down to Beersheba. But once he gets to Beersheba, it says that he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. In one sense, Jacob left nothing behind to come to the southernmost part of Canaan. Jacob stops there. Israel stops there to honor God with a sacrifice. You see, Beersheba was a really special place to Jacob because It was in Beersheba where his grandfather, Abraham, had come and dug a well and called it Beersheba. He also planted a tamarisk tree. But that had been over 100 years earlier. But Beersheba was still in their heart. It was when they were in Beersheba that God had called, that they had called on the name of the Lord there at Beersheba, where Abraham called on the name of the Lord. It was in Beersheba where, if you remember, when Hagar gets kicked out, that's where God met her, around the wells. It was from there that Abraham lived after he sacrificed his son Isaac, Jacob's father, on Mount Moriah. Isaac, Jacob's dad, he also had received promises from God there in Beersheba. And Isaac was the one that built an altar and sacrificed there. And he also called upon the name of the Lord there. And so this was home. This was a special place where he knew he could go. As a matter of fact, it was from Beersheba where Jacob left to go up to Laban to go find a wife. It was from there. And now Jacob has come there before he continues on in his journey. And I wonder if he was at the very same place where his dad had built the altar. If that tree is still blooming and still big in that area where his grandfather was at. Remembering what God had done in the past for his family there in Beersheba. And perhaps now inquiring what the Lord had for him in the future. We don't know. When we don't know exactly what to do, it's better to wait and worship, like we see Jacob doing here. It's better for us to wait and worship than to move and then mourn the decision for not inquiring of the Lord. And I love the fact that he goes to offer sacrifice and he comes to the special place that he knew well in that sense because of his father and grandfather. And verse 2 says, "Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night." More than 40 years earlier, when Jacob was about to leave the promised land to go up to Laban, the Lord had spoke to him in a dream. And that was way back in chapter 28. And now he's at a point in his life, all these years later, that he's about to leave the promised land once again. And God brought him to this place where God would speak to him and assure him through these visions of the night, these dreams, that he would go before him. And as he's there, as he's perhaps asleep, and God showing himself, revealing himself in these visions of the night, perhaps he's awake, I don't know, it doesn't really tell us. God says, "Jacob, Jacob." Now, I don't think it was a very soft, soothing voice because there's an exclamation mark on mine. "Jacob, Jacob." And it might not sound significant to us when we're reading through the scriptures and we see that God says, "Jacob, Jacob." Because sometimes we just read through scripture and we don't even think about the concept and what's really going on. But it's pretty significant to really understand that the God of the universe knows his name. The creator of everything knows Jacob's name. I don't know about you, but Jacob, as we've been studying his life up and down, He's kind of a scoundrel, isn't he? You would think God would want to forget his name. Well, he did change his name at one point. But he doesn't call him Israel here. He calls him Jacob. Jacob, Jacob. And that phrase, Jacob, Jacob, reminds us of other times when we're reading through the scriptures and you hear God say, Abraham, Abraham. Samuel, Samuel. Martha, Martha. Or even Paul when he was Saul. Saul, Saul. I think this should encourage us when we hear stuff like that, because what we should be encouraged is that God knows the names of his people. Earlier when we were praying before study, even as I knew this portion was coming up, I'm going, Lord, you know my voice up in heaven. I don't even have to introduce myself, when I come in prayers like, Lord, it's me again, Zeke. Remember me? I don't know if you need my real name, but you know me as Zeke. Everybody knows me as Zeke. I don't have to introduce myself. He knows my voice. And not only does he know my voice, but he knows my name. Just like he knows your name. And he knew your name even before you were walking with him. He knew it. And I love the fact that we serve a God that's the God of the universe, man. The creator who was and is to come. He's always been. And yet he knows your name. And not only does he know your name, but he knows what you go through. He knows you better than you know yourself. And the crazy thing is, he still likes you. Okay, he loves you. In the Gospel of John, give you a few scriptures here in chapter 10. Great chapter. Where it's talking about him. He says, to him, the doorkeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. That was in verse 3. Verse 14, he says, I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by them, by my own. In verse 27 of that same chapter, he says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. This is an intimate time for Jacob. And when he hears his name, and he's heard God's voice before, he responds by saying, here I am. What an appropriate response when you hear God whisper your name. I don't know if you've ever heard him. I mean, audibly, that would be stinking amazing. I'd probably think you're lying if you told me you did. But there's times that you can hear your name through his Spirit speak to you. And our natural response should be, because you know him, is here I am, Lord. And it's not just like, here I am, what do you need? It's like, what? What do you need from me? The fact that he called you by name. Here I am, Lord. And even though we see here that Jacob is still somewhat nervous about this move, and he still says, here I am. And God reassures him whose voice he is hearing, because he says, I am God. I am El. I am God. I am your God. I am the God of your father. Now, he doesn't mention it here, but he could have said, and I'm the God of your grandfather. And he tells him, do not fear to go down to Egypt. And I think it's interesting, again, we sometimes read through that and we just like, do not fear. He tells him that. Why? Because he fears. There's some timidity in him right now. And he's telling him, don't be afraid to go to Egypt. Now, it could be that as he's been praying, as he knows that he's been called to go to Egypt by his son, and it seems like it's all good and well, he stops there because I wonder if he's remembering the time that his grandfather went down to Egypt and another time of famine. Didn't turn out so well. Because God didn't tell him to go to Egypt. And yet he went because he was afraid and he knew that Egypt would have some food. And so Abraham goes down there, and it was an expression of unbelief on Abraham's part. And when you and I think that when we covered it, we're going, yeah, but as bad as it was because he lied about this and that, he still got rich off of it. And you're going, God blessed him. But Hagar was a part of that. I don't know if you remember that part. And we're still dealing with the effects of Hagar because of the people that came from Hagar. To this day, the effects have not gone away. Or perhaps he remembered the time that his dad, his father, Isaac, was going to go down to Egypt, and God stopped him from going to Egypt and didn't allow him to go. And even though right now, at this moment, his son Jacob, Joseph, whom he hasn't seen in 22 years, has asked for him to come down, it's almost as if he's going, it's all well and good, but he's not God, and I need to seek God before I trust what man is telling me. And so I will seek God for right now before I continue on in my journey. He's already fallen in that direction. He's already going south. But he stops before he heads out of Canaan. It's interesting because God, 200 years later, basically now, had told Abraham that his descendants would be strangers in the land. And it's interesting because he tells them they will be strangers in that land for 400 years. Guess how long these guys are going to be down there? 400 years. That they would go down there and they would end up serving these people. And that's exactly what's going to happen. You're going, then why are you sending them over there, God? Why would he be leading his family to this foreign land? Even though he might not totally understand what God's doing. And I've shared with you the reason that God is sending them to Egypt, because he knew that they would be protected there. If they don't go to Egypt, they would stay in Canaan and they would assimilate to the Canaanites. But he's sending them to Egypt, and he's sending them to a particular place because he knows, I'm going to put you over here. I'm not going to let you be right in the palace. I'm going to let you be in this land over here where they think that you're an abomination and they're not ever going to want to be close to you guys. So he's sending them to protect them, but you're going, but they're going to become slaves. It's like, exactly. I don't know if you know this, but life is hard. And God allows hard things in our lives. And that's what's going to happen here. They're going to go, and he's leading his family. He doesn't understand what the future holds, but guess what? He knows who holds the future. And the guy who holds the future, the God who holds the future, is the one that's telling him to go. And he tells them, because I will be with you. Do not fear. I will be with you, and I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you up again. And so what we see here is that God's telling them, I'm making you go. I'm sending you go, but I'm giving you some promises here. I will, I will, I will. I will make a great nation out of you. He's leaving with 70 people, as we're going to see in a little bit. They will leave with close to 2 million people. They're a clan right now. But he has to get them out of there so they can become a people, a nation. And not only that, he says, I will not only send you there, but I will be with you the whole time. When all the hard things happened to the nation of Israel down there, God was with them when they became slaves. He watched over them, and when the time was right, he delivered them. But he told them, it's not going to be forever. I will bring you up again. Not just physically, Oh, he would die there, but physically they would bring his body back to bury him in the land of Canaan. Don't fear. And it's interesting because he ends up telling him there, it says, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. And what he's basically telling them is, you're going to go down there. I will bring you back, but not alive. You're going to die down there. That phrase that Joseph will put his hand on your eyes, he's assuring him that Joseph will be there when you die, and he will be the one that closes your eyes when you can't close them yourself because you're dead. And you're almost going like, oh man, what a bummer. It's like, no, man, that was going to be special. Because the son who he thought was dead is now alive, and when he dies, his son will be there to be with him in his dying moments. And he will have the honor, because it's an honor to close somebody's eyes when they leave this place onto the next. And Joseph would be doing that for him. And so he's assured of all these things. And yes, his body will be brought back to the land of Canaan, and it will be buried in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham had bought the property. And he will be buried with Abraham and Sarah, with Isaac and Rebekah, and with Leah. Not Rachel, with Leah. And they will all be buried at that place. And so he arose. Verses 5 through 7, he tells us that he arose and he took off. He is now on this journey. Pharaoh had told them, hey, don't bother bringing everything. The richness of this land will take care of you. But he just couldn't. He couldn't leave everything behind. He couldn't leave his livestock behind. That would be cruel in a time of drought. He brings them with him. But that's going to be who they are over there, though. And I'm sure they brought some personal stuff. It's like, I can't leave this little thing. Got to take it with me. Now, let's go from verse 8 to 27. Dun, dun, dun. Don't laugh, Eric. Let's go nice and slow. Whew. Is it getting hot in here already? Okay. Verse 8. Now these were the names of the children of Israel, Jacob and his sons, who went to Egypt. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn. The sons of Reuben were Hanoch, Pelu, Hezron, Carmi. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zoharz, and Shul, the son of a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, Merari. The sons of Judah were and Onan, Shula, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar were Tola, Puvah, Job, Shimron. The sons of Zebulun were Sirad, Elon, Jael. These were the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, and his daughter Dinah. All the persons, his sons and his daughter were 33. The sons of Gad were Ziphion, Haggai, Shunai, Esbon, Ari, Areli. The sons of Asher were Jimnah, Ishna, Ishuai, Beriah, and Sarah, their sister. And the sons of Beriah were Heber and Melchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah, his daughter. And these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Rachel were Jacob's wife were Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore him. The sons of Benjamin were Bela, Bicker, Ashbel, Jira, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mippin, Huppin, and Ard. They must have been twins. Anyways, these were the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. The son of Dan was Hashem. The sons of Naphtali were Jaziel, Gunai, Jazer, and Shilmian. I got tired. That's the last one, I think. No, maybe not, huh? These were the sons of Bilnah, whom Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter, and her sons, and she bore these to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons who went with Jacob to Egypt, who came from his body, besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph, who were born with him in Egypt, were 2 persons. All the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. Man, it gets hot in here when those things happen, right? But anyways, I'm almost sweating. We're done with the names, right? But in typical fashion in those days, just the males are named, but they don't list really all the females. Thank God for that, right? Because they probably had weirder names. But the only 2 females really that were named were Jacob's daughter, Dinah, and then in verse 17 it says that it was Asher's daughter Sarah was also there as well. But the daughters that were spoken of back in chapter 7 probably refer to the daughters-in-laws, because we really don't know if he had any other daughters. But be that as it may, it must have encouraged Jacob to see how God had multiplied his descendants. He had protected them, he had provided for them, and he kept them together for this important move that they are now all moving down. Some of the family probably didn't realize it at the time, but they were a very special people. God had his hand upon them, and this is a very important time in history as well, because again, if they would have stayed where they were at, and the famine could have wiped them all out, there were only, it says 70 people, not including their wives. It could have been a little bit more, but it was probably under 100 people. They could have got wiped out with the famine because it was that severe, but God is protecting them because he has an important work for them to do in the years ahead. Oh, there are going to be trials and all these things are going to happen, but this little band of migrants, if you will, they will eventually bless the whole world. And we are here today. Once again, we're here today because God took care of them in the scriptures here. And he's showing us that, how he takes care of his people. Again, there's a long list of Jacob's descendants here. And yet, in verse 26, it tells us that the descendants that came from his body were 66, whereas in verse 27, it tells us that there were 70. And the first number basically represents those who traveled with Jacob to Egypt. And the second number kind of includes the children, the grandchildren already basically in Egypt. And so the breakdown, if we have time really quick, it kind of goes like this, that again, Leah, her children and grandchildren were 33. Zilpah with her kids and everybody were 16. Rachel and her kids were 14. And Bilnah and her children were 7. And so it totals out to 70. And then you add Dinah in there, and 71. But then it tells us that and Onan, they died in Canaan. They were Judah's sons, plus Joseph and his 2 sons. So you have to minus 5. I have it all down right here. I'm not that good with math. And so it totals to 66 people, but then you add Joseph, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Jacob, and it goes back to 70. And so it's interesting that from 70, again, including Joseph's sons, this nation would grow there in Egypt. And like many times the way God works, things start off slow in the beginning, but they just begin to multiply. From the time that God called Abraham, it took at least 25 years just to add one son, Isaac. It took 60 years for Isaac to add another son, Jacob. It took about another 60 years for Jacob to add 12 sons and 1 daughter. And it will take 430 years basically, when they leave Egypt, that they will have at least 600,000 men, not including women and children. And so it took 215 years to grow from 1 to 70. But it will take 430 years basically for them to grow to about 2 million or more. Isn't that wild? But that's what starts happening. Again, you're going, man, 1, and then boom, 12. And from that 12, you have 70. And from that 70, it's just going to grow and grow and grow. And so in verse 28 to the end of the chapter here, it says, then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a long while. And Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive. Verse 31. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds. For their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. So it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say, your servant's occupation has been in livestock from our youth until now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. The 11 brothers had already met Joseph, so they already know what to expect. They've already reunited with him. But now, after 22 years, Jacob gets to meet his son, gets to see him once again. And the fact that Jacob chooses Judah to kind of guide them to go, hey, go take care of business and we'll meet up right here, kind of seems to indicate that now Judah has taken that position. He's fourth in line, but he is now like the oldest one. He's the one, the responsible one, which kind of suggests that, again, his father has put a lot of trust in him. And one commentator said it's quite possible that at this time they have already told their dad what exactly happened. And so now they are in his good graces once again. We don't know that for sure, but it kind of seems like things have smoothed over. Now, Jacob could see the hand of God in all that's going on now and everything that's happening in spite of all his past failures and everything that's gone on. The fact that Judah has now stepped up, he can see, because Judah has done some crazy stuff, but Jacob is seeing, even with his past failures, this man has stepped up. And his descendants, Judah's descendants, as we will see in a couple chapters, they will be the ones that will be called the royal line, the royal tribe. And so when he says that they're going to go up to Goshen, as they're coming down, if you look at Egypt, Goshen would be the northeast side, the upper side towards the delta of where the Nile River comes. And it was a very fertile land and stuff. And some commentators, it said that he gave them that land, and it was about 900 square feet or square miles, not 900 square feet, that's really small, square miles. But just to give you a little picture of what 100 square miles looks like. 100 square miles would be from Sheep Creek to 395. From Phelan Road, just north of where we know Maverick Stadium is at, in that area. That's 100 square miles. So 30 or 900 square miles, when you stand and you just kind of look at the Victor Valley, that's about 900 square miles. So he's giving them around that land. There's 70 people. You thought you lived on 2.5 acres and your neighbors were way out there. The 70 people, but there will be 2 million in 400 years. Kind of like what we've seen up here, right? Everything has grown. But that's just to give you an idea of how vast and how big. But it was very plush, the land of Goshen. And so we see that, again, he's going to bless them abundantly. And Joseph, again, he goes and meets his dad. And I'm not going to get all emotional here because I haven't got enough time. But you can only imagine. You can only imagine. His son was dead. That's what he thought. And the fact that they weep together, it doesn't tell us that Jacob weeps. But Joseph, for the 5th time, we're seeing him weep. And he just falls on his dad, and he can't let go. And he can't. And I can imagine that Jacob is just holding on to him, wanting to see his face, but not wanting to let go. What an emotional time. And then Joseph gives them all some instructions on what they're supposed to do. It's interesting that Joseph understands, no, they need to be in the land of Goshen. Because Pharaoh could have easily said, no, your people aren't going to go over there. They're going to come and live with me here. It's good that he doesn't let that happen. Because they would have assimilated a lot better or a lot more in Egypt, near Pharaoh. It's good that they're going to be in the land of Goshen because, again, it's going to be some miles away. And they have all this land. And then he says, hey, just tell them that we're shepherds. Yes, we're shepherds, but we deal with livestock. Not so much sheep, because at the end he says, because shepherds, sheep herders, they were an abomination to the Egyptians, which wasn't a bad thing because, again, the Egyptians are not going to want to really have anything to do with them. And that's part of God's protection, that he brings them there and he kind of isolates them, but he's going to save them there. He's going to protect them there. He's going to make them grow, because at 70 people, you really can't be beating up other nations. But once you have about close to 600,000 men, now you got an army. And it will be at that time that he will deliver them eventually. But he brings them there for a time. And Joseph, again, he's just such an amazing guy that he gives his brothers the instructions. This is what you're to do. When you're asked, what's your occupation, tell them this. You're not lying, because that's what we've always done as far as being shepherds like this with herds and stuff. Just don't mention sheep. Anyways, let's pray. Jesus, we just want to thank you and praise you.